it's a roller coaster. You're going from this is the best day ever, I'm so glad I'm doing this, to like, why the hell am I wasting my life on a web hosting company? We focused on being the simplest, and that is still our bread and butter. Like, we are the simplest. We're not the most advanced, the most powerful, we are the simplest.
Elston Barreto, founder of TinyHost, the easiest way to publish and share websites, portfolios, and presentations online. Built solo and bootstrapped, TinyHost now serves over 3,000 paying customers and handles more than 150,000 monthly visitors.
The first dollar you ever make online, it'll never feel any better than that. That's the best it gets. I wanted to build something that people would pay for, I would own, I could move fast with, and then eventually I could live off, and that was it. And that was just, the goal was just revenue first. At that point, couldn't take a vacation because if anything went wrong or customer messaged about an issue, I had to respond to them.
Can you take us back to your first paid customer and the process you went through to secure it?
Before we have a solution, we have a problem. So can you explain a little bit about how you identified the problem that required you to create a solution?
Yeah, so I did it in a very unconventional way. I think a lot of business advice, especially in like the lean startup stuff, is basically you launch something, you basically get users to try to get you feedback on it and see if there's a demand there. But I did zero market research. Effectively, I used the scratch your own itch kind of strategy, where I thought it was too difficult to get things online. If I did market research initially, I would have probably seen a few competitors. And in my naive entrepreneurship mind at that point, I would have probably said this is not like a good opportunity because there's people in the space. Hindsight now, if there is people in the space, it means validation. So like 100% like do it. But basically I set up similar automations for companies in the past because I'm a software engineer. And so I realized that if you knew how to set these up using Amazon Web Services, which we're built on, it's actually super cheap and easy to get things online. And you don't need to use Dropbox and other things. You can have your own kind of place to put things online. But if you didn't, it would be super difficult. So I thought to myself, I think it would be super useful if I could automate this and give it to people. And I just wanted to see what people would use it for. So it was a bit of an experiment to see, if this would be a valid tool for people or not. And what I did really well is I didn't tie myself to a solution. I said, this is a technology and I want to really see what people are using it for, and then hone in on it, because I made the mistake in the past, like having a solution for a problem that I think exists, and then going really, really hard, holding it tight, and then realizing that it's not what the market wants. So it was me. I think I spent maybe 2-3 weeks on it, part-time, building a first version of it, released it, actually promoted it on Reddit. That was the first time. A lot of people loved it. I got some really good feedback from it, and then kind of honed in on what customers actually liked us versus didn't. And what's really interesting is I initially actually released it as a dev tool, developer tool for people, for coders, and they came back with feedback saying, well, why do we need this? It looks exactly like Vercel and Netlify and GitHub Pages, which are the popular brands out there, and you can do it for free. And I had another set of users who found us, and they weren't technical. And their feedback was, this is amazing. I used to, had to go find a developer to help me do this. Now I can do it myself. It took me seconds. It's super easy. So I basically ignored all the people that hate us and focused on the people that liked us. And then we did something really interesting early on, which is called repositioning. So took the same product and just repositioned it from a branding perspective. So we were the simplest static host, which probably means nothing to you. It's very developer kind of focused branding. And then we rebranded us to the simplest way to share, your work online effectively. And that opened us up to non-technical people. And they really loved us. And from that, we figured out that this was a gap, in the market that none of the existing kind of hosting companies were looking into. The industry itself is a huge billion-dollar company, but it's super archaic. And we found some really good ground in that.
Quite an interesting story of problem solving and market validation, because you almost created something, dropped it into a few marketplaces, and then sat in those marketplaces yourself and was just very responsive to feedback.
Yeah.
Would that be your advice to entrepreneurs, to do something similar?
I think there's many ways to run businesses, and on my journey, I've found different ways that people have done it. I know people that do there's now the 12 apps in 12 weeks thing people do, where they create 12 different apps if you're on tech, and then they figure out, how that works, and they pick the one that does the best traction. For me, that's the complete opposite of how I want to start a business, because it sounds exhausting, the context switch to do that. I think it is a valid strategy that what I did that people often miss. And that's literally try to pick a validated space that there's already big players in. Take that and maybe try to find your twist on it. So simplify it, make it better, find the problems that other customers are having with those products, make it cheaper, focus it on a different niche. Take it maybe from focus it on real estate agents, for example, things like that. So that would be my strategy, and I think that's a strategy that people often miss, but it's a very safe strategy, because one of the hardest things in entrepreneurship is ensuring that you have a validated market for what you're trying to build. And you basically check that box by just picking a validated industry. And then there are always opportunities in whatever you're building, especially in the business space, because you can build a CRM for, hospitality, for example, and Salesforce will still exist. It doesn't mean your CRM won't exist and make money. And so there is lots of opportunities to just, take existing industries. So I would literally, my advice would be pick something that's validated, find problems in it where you think you can innovate it, or maybe, add AI now, which is a massive advantage through it. And then it gives you a blueprint of how to really grow a business there. And a lot of the problems or hurdles you have to overcome are already solved for you. And that gives you an easier path to a success goal than trying to reinvent the wheel and building something groundbreaking.
If you've taken something from this, an insight you've used or could have used to refine, design, or scale your business, hit subscribe.
Ironically, because this is free, most people won't.
Studies show that if we charged even £1, you'd be more likely to take action because you'd feel the value.
But we don't do that. So if this helped you, that one click of support helps us to keep doing it and continue delivering business insights every week.
You came from a corporate background at JP Morgan and then launched TinyHost. You built it for the first few years on your own, and now you're a team of 10. Could you take us back to when you began TinyHost, how you decided to launch the business on your own, and how you've decided to hire the first people that you brought into the team?
So I come from the bootstrapping space. So there's a big community of people just bootstrapping companies now. The term is indie hackers. It's nothing to do with cybersecurity or anything like that. It's just independent people hacking away and building projects. And so they're very much pro people solo founders, solopreneurship, one man kind of building, marketing and getting growing a business. And so I was really interested in that space. And in the past, I've worked in different types of companies. I've tried to apply to Y Combinator, tried to work with investor to build a company out. And this new model of building companies was super attractive because it was you didn't need anyone's permission. You could just go and build it yourself. You focus on building a product rather than trying to have a co-founder and build a team around you. Focus on the success first and revenue. And so part of that community really made me figure out and understand how you can do this. And so it was tough, but I think especially as a solo founder, you can move very, very fast, right? And so there's nobody you have to ask permission for or collaborate with when you're trying to get decisions and figure out things. You can just build and then publish things and execute very, very fast. But the downsides of that, you don't have a sounding board. Maybe if you're trying to look through marketing decisions and strategies and that kind of thing. So I counteracted that with being part of a community that I could lean on when I had questions and issues and problems that needed to be solved. But I also, in the early days, had a marketing consultant that was recommended through the community. And so We used to catch up once a week for like, I don't know, half an hour, 45 minutes, run through everything in my head. He'd help me kind of distill that, and was super helpful in the early days just to figure out how do we execute on strategies, what do we do, what do we focus on. And I think just finding these fractional people can really help. So you can just focus on yourself as the main contributor, and then lean on a lot of fractional people who are way smarter than you in certain areas, and have a team effectively, right? Which is still you as a company, but you have that entourage of people that help you with success. And I did that for a while. And then the downside of this community is people are very much focused on solopreneurship and one-man bands, right? And for me, I didn't understand that. And so as the company grew and became bigger, I wanted to de-risk myself from it, because we started having thousands of users, thousands of customers. And I probably literally at that point couldn't take a vacation, because being completely switched off, in the sense that because if anything went wrong or customer messaged about an issue, I had to respond to them. So naturally, I wanted to build a small team around it. So I wanted to remove myself from the equation. And I personally enjoy, parts of management. I know a lot of people don't. And so it was in my stride to basically build a team around it. And we hired a remote team. And so we didn't go hire like Silicon Valley engineers. We didn't have VC capital, but I think there's a lot of amazing talent all over the world that are very cost effective and affordable, and people just looking for work that naturally wouldn't get in because they're not in London or Silicon Valley, and they're very good engineers for what you need at that point. So hired a team pretty much offshore, slowly built that, and then from that build a really cool cohesive group of people that are still working towards the common goal, and it's still trial and error. Like the hardest part of going from a solo person to a team is taking all this information you have in your head and instilling it into a team, because it's really hard to clone yourself, right? And people 100% are the most difficult thing probably to work with in a company, right? Because you have people's opinions, but also different drives and all of those kind of things to deal with. And but when you get that right and people understand what you're doing, you can do a lot more. There's the famous quote, if you want to go fast, go by yourself. But if you want to go far, go together. And I 100% believe in that. And there is a time where you need to shift that thinking to achieve what you want.
You mentioned in there, obviously, that you were bootstrapped, and what comes with being bootstrapped is a limited budget. So I'm just wondering, in those early days, particularly when it's just you don't have those soundboards, how did you personally work out how to utilize that limited budget that you had? Where did you prioritize your spending?
So we've spent nothing on ads until now. We're trying it out. So like $0 marketing budget. And I think there is a lot of things you can do for free that people often leave out or forget about. And that's like content marketing, like community marketing, SEO. I learned myself. It's free to do. But a lot of the, I guess, wisdom they usually had to pay for, I got from a community, right? So there's a community of people that were running a similar sized company, or basically had already done this before, and you just ask them, like, what did you do? Then you go and do it. And so the stuff I did really early on is, I'm a software engineer, right? So I was fortunate not to need a co-founder to pay anyone to build anything. So I just coded everything myself, but I didn't know how to market. But I taught myself to market. The TinyHost actually was a project for me to figure out how to get users myself on a product. So I got to a point where I became really good at building things and coding things, because I was an engineer for 8 years at that point. But what I wasn't good at is the business side of stuff. So getting users there, getting brand awareness, getting traffic. And so I said to myself, I'm going to spend a month building this product, and then the rest of the time is just going to be figuring out how do I get users on this. And so I effectively just focused on anything I could do. So I made YouTube videos, I wrote blog articles, I posted on Reddit, I connected on Slack communities, did a bit of cold outreach, but didn't spend money as such. Effectively just used my time towards that. I did have some money, of course, because I was working. So I used that towards maybe progressing the product a bit more, where it wasn't a value. It wasn't the most important need for me to code more. Is really important for me to market more. And so I basically hired like an offshore developer. It was someone I worked with in the past, and he was working a few hours a week, just developing the product and working things out on that. That's basically where I probably spend the most money in the first year, if anything. And everything else was just time spent. That's
sweat equity.
Yeah. Trying to figure out what would work from a marketing angle. That was it.
So I suppose maybe not looking at it in terms of cash, but in terms of sweat equity, as we said, your priorities, you could obviously handle the actual development yourself by and large. And so for you, the most important thing was to learn how to step into the marketing aspect.
Yeah, was that, but also understand what this business should be and what the market wants, right? And that proximity to our users, me being the person making the product, but also listening to the users, just having that really close feedback cycle and getting the intuition of like what this product is forming and shaping to be, was super critical early on. So I did what I encourage a lot of people if they're bootstrap right now. I basically say like marketing early on is basically like sprinkling seeds all over the internet and then doubling it down on what grows. Like that's effectively what you need to do. There isn't really a silver bullet there. There are ways that you can make that faster, but try everything. You have to. Because you can't spend 2 months on SEO and then 2 months on making videos and then 2 months on, I don't know, Reddit, because you've just wasted 6 months and maybe none of those things have worked. And you have to spread yourself thin and then get signals and see what's working. But my other advice is, especially if you are in the validated industry, look what other companies are doing. And from that, you can basically see, what works for them. And so SEO works for us. It's very good if you're building a tool. And a lot of other companies in that space use that. And you can reverse engineer their strategies and effectively make it work for you. And so that can help you as well. So it was pretty much just marketing everywhere. And then it really took us about probably, a year to get solid traction. And that's one of the benefits of having a side business is there wasn't pressure on it. Yeah. But and probably if it was a full-time project, I would have killed the project a lot earlier. And a lot of people do kill things, if it doesn't work in like a month or 2 months, that kind of thing. And you don't have the luxury, obviously, if you're full-time, you need an income, right? So you have to make things work. So there's different ways of running a business. For me, I would do what I did more so than like quit my job and go full in on a business. There's obviously you can go faster with the right strategy on that. But there is a lot of benefit for doing a part-time business and then focusing and having time through something, right? Because it also just helps you really focus on the right things. Like I know people and founders who have spent like a week trying to find the perfect design and logo for something, and the business never really made it anywhere. Whereas I created our first logo in like, I don't know, a day kind of thing, and then shipped it basically. And so, yeah, it's different strategy, which has its own kind of strengths as well. And then at the right point, I made a transition from full-time job to a full-time founder, and haven't looked back since.
You've used SEO really effectively, and nowadays you have over 3,000 paid customers. But can you take us back to your first paid customer and the process you went through to secure it?
Yeah, you always remember your first, like especially the first the first dollar you ever make online. It'll never feel any better than that. That's the best it gets. Maybe, the second best is probably when you make $1 million or whatever, but it's a downhill trajectory from that. And
can you remember the first one?
Yeah, I still remember it. So we released Tiny in I think 2020 or 2019, the end of 2019. And effectively, I was still trying to figure out who would use us. And to be honest, we didn't even have a way you could pay for the first few months, because I just wanted people to use it and then figure out how people would pay with it. But something I did really well, which I learned in the past, is I launched a product which, I invited many people to use it, and then I got feedback from Reddit and other people saying, this is great, but it would be really cool if you add this feature as well, or this would be super cool. But rather than just editing it, I basically added it, but put it behind a paywall. And so that became the monetization plan. So people wanted custom domains, or people wanted analytics. So I said, sure, I'll give you that, but you pay for it. And so the free tier was the same, but then what we did is we had a certain set of features that you have to pay for. And then I launched on Product Hunt. I think it was February after that. And that was where we got our first customer. And I was like super over the moon ecstatic about it. I was like, wow, people actually want to pay. And it was something like, I don't know, $10 or something that they pay for it. But it was huge validation, right? That people really wanted to pay for this tool, which I built. And I remember that. And it took us a long time to get just one or two early customers. And even for the first year, we were like 20 customers kind of thing, hovering around that. Now we pick up 30, 40, 50 customers a day kind of thing. So it's come a long way from that. But it was this evolution of launching a product really, simply, that didn't really care about. If you look at the first version of Tiny, it's super basic. So real MVP. You couldn't even log in. We didn't even ask for your email. Just wanted you to use it. And then adding like a login form, payment form, and then doing a bigger launch effectively, right? So I am against like the whole let's work really, really hard and then do this grand unveiling and launch and then everyone's going to use you, because I've done it in the past. I'm much more about like just soft launch. And you can launch as many times as you want, right? Like this, you think you launch something and everyone in the world has heard about it, but no. You just launch the same thing, you retweet it, you post it out on LinkedIn again, and a whole new audience has heard of it. And just keep on doing that. And so that was really interesting, just being able to launch something small and early, and then ramp it up when you have more understanding and a better vision of what the product should be.
We've spoken about budgets, limited budgets, and obviously to where you are now. I'm interested to know, what was the decision behind bootstrapping versus raising? It's so often that we speak to a lot of founders who've all raised money, and there seems to be a massive appetite for founders. It's a real validation for them, almost more so than revenue, which is something that you've focused on. You've got great monthly recurring revenue, but you haven't focused on funding. So I'm just really interested to know what the decisions were behind that.
This topic is probably my biggest issue with entrepreneurship, like in general at the moment. And I think the landscape is changing. So traditionally, like I grew up in the similar kind of space, right? I saw TechCrunch, I saw X raised 30 million, Y raised 10 million. And this was like a dream, right? To go raise from Sequoia A16. But you dive deeper into that, and there are many trade-offs and quite big oversights and trade-offs that people ignore when they raise capital, right? So number one is it's not easy to raise capital anymore anyway, especially if you're not in the Silicon Valley. I know people that I've spoken to 50 investors, and maybe 60th one has basically invested in you. That's a full-time job. And so you're one person company, or even if you're two, one person has to be fundraising, the other person has to be building the business. And that just delays you validating your business, getting revenue, and trying to build a valid business case on something. You may have raised all this capital, but then that doesn't prove that you have a valid business. And all of these headlines that you see, there's no headlines of when they shut down shop and basically all their money is gone. And that is often the case, right? When people raise money, like after a while, they run out of money and they need to shut down. And so the other downside is when you raise capital, you're committing yourself typically to build a business in a specific way. People don't also understand that. You basically, there are strings attached to that. So the VC model is such that, 1 in 10 or 2 out of 10 companies actually succeed. So 80% of companies fail in their books. And so they need that 1 or 2 companies to generate more multiples of return than the other companies there. And so that means you can't, build a company to 1-2 million, ARR, which is a really good company, but in the VC world, it's a failure. they want you to build companies 50, 100 million, a billion unicorn company. There's nothing wrong with that. But I don't think that should be the blueprint and the only way that people need to raise and build companies, right? And so going through a journey, this isn't my first kind of project and company. I wanted to look at things differently. I wanted control over how I would, build a company, where I would take it, and ownership. And also, I honestly couldn't be asked to go around and knock on like 50 VC doors asking, whether we could, raise from them, but also trying to convince them that my idea would succeed, because I myself didn't know, what was going on. And so you're effectively trying to ask permission to build your own idea. And there's nothing wrong with raising with raising capital. Certain businesses need it, of course, but I think less businesses need it than they think. And there's also nothing wrong with raising capital later in a game. You actually will get a better deal out of it, better terms, better valuation, etc. But I do think we need to shift away from thinking, I have an idea, let me go raise money for it. The landscape is changing so much. Like, you don't even need a technical co-founder these days. There are tons of tools that help you build an MVP, and you can just get someone to, and then you can get someone to help you market it, that kind of thing. So you can build something by yourself. And so there is also a shift you're seeing recently that seed stage funding or really early stage funding is kind of narrowing down, and more funding is going to go into later stage games, which makes sense. And for me, it was all about just trying to figure out, I wanted to build something that people would pay for, I would own, I could move fast with, and then eventually I could live off. And that was it. And that was just, the goal was just revenue first. And that is what the bootstrapping community I'm part of, the indie hacker scene is part of. And there were hundreds of examples of, profitable companies that were doing things that way. And amazed by some of these use cases, very niche use cases. There's an app that I found that basically just helps people do US tax returns, and it makes $20,000 a month basically, and that was a really cool income just to be able to go full time and just build things. And so that really navigated my decision a lot more, and from there I just focused on that. Even to this day, we get inbound queries from VCs and people looking to invest, but just the thought of needing to build a deck and showing people how much revenue we've had, these are the customers, this is that, and the whole pitch thing, we don't need capital really to continue to grow. Of course, it'll be nice, to have money to invest a bit more, but we're self-fulfilling in terms of that we reinvest the profits we make, and we've continued to grow. And I think there is a lot of value to that. And I think people, even VC companies I've seen who've raised 10, 20 million, they're post-revenue, for example, but they're not profitable. And for me, doing that and then waiting maybe 5-6 years to actually, gain value from the company that you've invested in, and maybe you break even at that point, and maybe you need to raise more, maybe you need to work even harder because your valuation is not good enough. That didn't seem rewarding for the time and effort that we put in as a founder. And some people, really, enjoy building that unicorn, and it's a strategy for them. There are multiple ways to build a business, and it's good for them. But for me, it was just a different strategy. And I'm not against, raising the future and turning it into a bigger company, but I hadn't made my mind up, what I just want it to be, right? And so I delayed the decision. I'm still delaying it until, I have a better understanding of where I want it to be.
Do you have just quite quickly, do you have perhaps a mental checklist that you would pass on to someone if they were in a similar position? They're not trying to build a unicorn, hammering huge raises, pre-seed, seed. If someone came along to you with a nice business idea similar to Tiny that they could probably build themselves, maybe with a couple of other people, do you have a checklist that you could say to them, listen, I would try and tick off as many of these as possible before going through the doors of VC?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two things literally. It's try to get someone to pay for you, anybody. That's a massive validation factor. Somebody pays. You go past 90% of people trying to get into that space because you've got somebody paying for you, even if it's $1. The second is find a single distribution channel, so a marketing channel that works for you. I think that is your number one goal when you launch any business is you as a founder, you need to find where your audience exists and who's gonna, where they're organically gonna come from, and that will make or break your company, because that's how I failed in the past, because had a product, got a few users coming through, but never knew how to take it and scale it to the next stage, right? And I think if you have those two elements, you're in a way better position to make things work. The irony is some investors in the landscape, they treat post-revenue companies worse than pre-revenue companies, because that illusion that like how much you could make is not there anymore. But it baffles me, like, why that's a thing. Whereas if you don't make any money, like, you could make millions, but if you do make $1, maybe you're not going to make millions. But that doesn't make any sense to me.
You're a solo founder.
Yeah.
Now you haven't taken investments, you're bootstrapped, and you've got revenue coming in, which gives you complete control. But managing cash flow is never easy. How do you manage the cash flow of TinyHost?
Yeah, again, we've taken quite a conservative approach on how we invest and grow the company, in the sense that we don't get us to a point where every month we're like $0 in the bank. So we're profitable. We've been profitable from day one, and the way I've built and hired a team is in a way that I know effectively that we have enough runway to continue to pay them for months on end, right? Even if we made no money past this point. And so the cash that we have in the bank, we never had a cash flow problem, essentially. Like we always had enough capital to grow the team and continue growing it. And so that's one of the advantages of also growing slow and going bootstrap, in a way that you control your growth rate, right? And you basically are able to invest when you need and when you think you have the resources to do that. And effectively, at the rate we're growing, we could effectively onboard one new person every month, but we didn't need to, and that's been great. And so even myself, I haven't taken like huge amounts out of the company. Didn't need it. Just was always interested in reinvesting as much as we can back into the company, and growing it, and that's been like super cool. And that's, I think, one of the biggest advantages of bootstrapping. Like, we don't never need to go out to the market to raise money or think about how we're gonna cover some cash flow issues. We are lucky. We are a recurring revenue company. We're a subscription company, so we know how much money we get every month. And when you build a recurring revenue company, especially the longer it takes for you to get to that revenue, actually the slower it'll take for you to lose that revenue. And so people of sometimes think, like, and even myself, I'm like, what if like all the customers cancel tomorrow? Well, they won't. Effectively, even if the product becomes really, really bad, you'll slowly see a decline of customers, but it'll probably take years to go from like what we have now to zero. And even that, it may not even be reach zero. It'll probably reach like a few hundred at that point. And so you build this moat, right, of just capital coming through, and it continues to grow. What we do have as a subscription in any company is churn issues, right? And so you have a certain number of customers joining, a certain number of customers canceling, and you need to ensure that more customers join and cancel, otherwise you'll start declining. And so we've been fortunate to continue to grow every single month since we've launched, but we do need to work on reducing the churn, and so reducing customers that cancel, and that's a product issue. That's making focusing on the right customers a bit more. We don't want to be that company where you say, you want to cancel, call us up and send us a postcard and then we'll review, which some people do. And yeah, it's a gray area, or really bad area to be. But it's been very manageable so far, which has been good.
And if you think back to when you had 20 customers, and now you compare that to now, has your approach to managing your cash flow changed?
Not really. I mean, when we had 20 customers, it was just me, to be honest. I think probably I've been a bit more risky in some of the investments that we have. So we have capital we can like throw on ads or individual influencers, right? Which is super cool. But I've still just always focused on having a core buffer in the bank. plus basically, making sure that we can run payroll and everything else we need to do. And so it's pretty much been effectively the same, I think. Yeah.
We spoke about marketing briefly earlier when we were talking about a limited budget and how you sort of self-taught yourself with SEO. And the SEO has actually been really effective for Tiny Host. But I just wanted to dive into a little bit deeper into the methods of your marketing and branding and what you found has worked for you.
One of the biggest things I touched upon was repositioning. So that's literally just taking what you have existing as a product and just rebranding it. And that means, redesigning a little bit, but also it's the copy and the text is so important in your product that people often ignore it. And so one of my friends runs a really cool company called marketingexamples.com, and just gives you loads of examples of copies basically, and how to write good and bad copy. But simple way you rephrase the sentence, shortening something can mean a huge world of difference when a customer comes onto your page and chooses to sign up or not, because you often have 5-10 seconds to do that. And I learned that really early on. Was super focused on making sure the H1, which is the header title on your landing page, is probably the most important copy you'll ever write, and that needs to be on point. You experiment with that, you work on it, you change it, you adjust it as you get customers in different type of use cases. But that is your most important thing. And we focused on being the simplest, and that is still our bread and butter. We are the simplest. We're not the most advanced, the most powerful. We are the simplest, simple cells, especially in a place where technology becomes more and more kind of pervasive in our life. And there's so many buttons you have to click, so many configurations you need to set. A simple thing you could just need to do can take you, hours just to set up. And so being the simplest was the biggest thing for us from a marketing angle. And then I focused on what's called as the jobs to be done framework. And that is focusing on use cases where people need, tasks to be done. So I need to upload this restaurant menu online. Okay, what do people do for that? They Google it. They probably find a video on how do you upload a restaurant menu. They watch the video and they go use your app. So made a video, made a blog post about it, made a landing page about it. And that was it. And then there's lots of different jobs that people needed to be done, right? So they need to create a link for their resume. They need to upload their course. They need to test their code or their website they've done, or they need simple static web hosting. All of these use cases was what I figured out. And that was actually very much pioneered by SEO and keyword research. And so looking through tools like ahrefs.com and SEMrush, it's a database of what people are searching for, right? And you can, from that, figure out what are the interesting topics that you should focus on. And each keyword or topic has data. So it tells you how many people are searching for that month, how difficult is it to rank for that term, how much advertisers are paying to advertise for that keyword. And all these metrics combined tell you where you should focus. So the PDF, we never launched with PDF hosting, but I found that a bit later on as an interesting use case. And it took me maybe a day or two to implement that. But it basically took us probably a few months to start organically ranking for that. And then the floodgates opened. So that's always been the bread and butter. It's just jobs to be done. And that's probably why we have so many different profiles of people, for good and bad. Typically, in business, they probably teach you find one customer, find one niche, and then find everything you want, everything you need to know about them. Where do they hang out? Where do they eat? What do they read? And then you can advertise basically everything on them. We have 20, 30 different things of people so now we're trying to figure out who are the most profitable and focus a bit more on that. But because we've done these jobs to be done framework, we have everyone from students to people, coding apps to people owning restaurants use us. And then just gone really hard on SEO for that. And to this day, I think we get over 150,000 clicks from Google a month, which only counts for 40% of our traffic around that. And it's built up a lot of just brand awareness because of that. And then our second is YouTube. But YouTube is magnitudes less in terms of visitors and SEO, but interestingly higher converting based on people who watch versus sign up because it's a video. So there's also these things, the different channels are different conversion techniques and strategies. So there's a lot you need to consider, but SEO still brings us like tons of traffic.
Are you using any specific tools or softwares for your marketing?
Yeah, so I mean, Ahrefs is probably the biggest one we use. It's expensive, but it basically is the tool, I think, if you want to do SEO. Other than that, not really from a marketing perspective. I mean, we have our blog, we have, I mean, simple stuff like Google Sheets to track stuff and things like that. But Ahrefs is probably the bread and butter for us for, trying to get SEO off the ground.
You've scaled TinyHost from a solo project now to a team of 10 people. You're working all remotely.
Yep.
Can you give us some insight into how you choose who to hire and what kind of values you look for in your team?
Yeah, I remote, I think obviously has its pros and cons. But the one thing I've tried to keep whilst hiring remotely is get everyone in the same time zone. So you used to work with the people from India, for example, and there's a lot of great talent there, but it's 5 hours ahead. And so now, like, we have people in Lisbon, people actually in Nigeria, very great engineers there, people in UK, and then we have support either end, like Mexico and India, for full time coverage. But effectively, like, everyone is in the same time zone, and that makes things super easy to sync up with. And in terms of hiring remotely, I've made mistakes and I think learned a lot, but it's super important. There's some basic stuff that you overlook is they need to have a stable internet connection, especially because some places just don't have stable connectivity, and that can really affect just the day-to-day. But then communication is so key, so critical, and I'm still trying to figure out like how do you assess for that really, really early on. And there's some obvious like red flags as people just you don't show up for the interview, but like don't reply back fast enough, or not not great with their emails and clear and clarity. But like if you're in person, often a lot of communication issues can be understood if we're talking more body language, etc. But when you're online, like people need to be able to communicate very, very clearly, right? And so really look for that, and it's just about just having conversations and understand like you just general like vibing with somebody and being able to communicate a problem and getting the understanding of it. And the quicker both people understand what's going on, the better the candidate is, right? And so that's really, really important. And yeah, we often don't look for like crazy countries or cities which have like really which need high salaries, right? And so there's a lot of great talent in Europe as well. We just hired a first person from London, and it's been a progressive evolution, right? So I would love to obviously invest and hire more people in the UK as we grow, but we weren't able to do it at the beginning, and that's because we didn't have the capital, and we'd put more pressure on ourselves if we had to pay some of those salaries. And so we effectively slowly like stepped up and upgraded the team as we went along, and that's been super helpful. I was fortunate to be part of other companies in the past where we've hired remotely, and so I figured out how to do a good interview process and figured it out. And so but it's a challenge, but you also get the upsides is you get access to really good candidates across the world that you would never get in person, and they're less competitive. And also when you hire remotely, and especially if they're not in major cities, their retention is super high. So like they're just really happy like to be working remotely, have that flexibility and freedom. They don't need to go to an office. There are obviously, I mean, I would like to connect in person a bit more with people, but it's there are lots of people that kind of genuinely enjoy that. And then now there's this whole battle, like in person versus remote, like what's good. I personally believe in like a hybrid approach, where I don't think you should be in 5 days a week, but I think like a few days syncing is cool and helpful. I would look very, very closely on communication. and also just be a bit quicker in. It's a basic rule, like they say, hire slow, fire fast, right? And I knew that, but haven't done it as much. So I think really being honest about that. Like, is this person indispensable to your team? I think there's a really interesting quote. I think it might have been from Brian Chesky, Airbnb founder. But basically, you take one person in a team that you hired, and then you say to yourself, would you be comfortable if that person's ethics and culture was multiplied to the entire team, right? And that was the whole team was like that one person. And if it's a no, then they're probably not a good fit. If it's a yes, like you would like more people in the team to be like that person, then they're a great fit there for the team, right? And then there's the bus test, which I was explaining. It's God forbid anyone gets hit by a bus, but effectively, like if that person was unable to work tomorrow, like suddenly, would they be a big, loss to the team or not? And if they were not, then in hindsight, like especially in a small team, like are they doing enough to keep you moving, right? And the other thing, like in a small team, is that you're talking to everybody, right? And so each position in the team is very, very important. So there's no point hiring two people who could be one person's job, effectively, right? Even if they're worth, like, you could find them cheaper. So two people offshore, the same as someone you hired in the UK. If you're running a small team, if that one person in the UK is better than the two people combined, you reduce the communication issues between them, the personality issues there, and you just dealing with as few people as possible, I think is way better than trying to deal with 5 people who kind of are equivalent to one good person. And so at some point you need to do that and be honest with that as well.
Great.
I want to talk about AI.
Yeah.
We read something crazy the other day. PwC thinks that AI could contribute $15 trillion to the global economy by 2030, which is just breathtaking, really. But I wanted to talk about it in relation to tiny hosts for you as a business and also as an offering to customers. Let's start with the business first. Are you using AI, and if so, how are you using it?
We're using it internally for a few things. So one of the things is moderation. We have a huge moderation kind of issues with our platform because we are a hosting company, right? And we're very popular. So we have to really make sure that we're hosting the correct content is being uploaded. We've stayed away from the AI fad in terms of just like plugging AI into your product and then marketing it. I've seen this done really weakly in a lot of competitors and people in the space. But there are some really, really interesting use cases. So we've kind of taken more of like, I think the Apple-like approach and just sitting back and just seeing like what's happening with it. But interestingly, like AI is touched and just upscale companies even who don't use AI. Like, so we are one of them. And effectively, even though we don't have an AI feature anywhere, more people are using us because they are building apps with AI and need a place to host them. So that's been, and we've just been in the crosshairs of that like AI development phase. And so people who are like never knew how to code before are building, with GPT, Claude, Lovable. But then what's really interesting is they have this and then they're just like, but how do I host it? How do I deploy it? Like, what do I do next? And they're not technical. They don't even know what hosting is, right? And we need to do better at that. But when they find this, like, I just drag this and I drop it and then I have a link for it. And that's like this wow moment for people that we never had when we started, right? So the landscape's always changing. In terms of AI for us as a product and a feature, we're exploring helping people create content that then they can then host on Tiny. So rather than being able to use other tools and then hosting on Tiny, because we are just a hosting solution, You come with your files and content. Maybe we can help you create that content, on Tiny first. So that's interesting for us. But yeah, still constantly observing it, and yeah, it's one of those things where AI is not going to be a marketing term soon enough. It's just going to be expected to be in all products, right?
Yeah.
It's just the automation flow, and if you don't have it, people will be like, it's like not having, I don't know, social media presence, right, or something like that. Like, why don't you have it? Like, what's wrong? What's wrong with the company? Is something weird about it? It's just expected you have LinkedIn page or Twitter page, that kind of stuff, right? So it's just going to be part of every business at some point. So yeah, it's exciting to see, and it's changing everything for sure.
Yeah. So the case examples you were giving is quite an interesting one, because I've played around with, everyone. You don't have to go far on LinkedIn to see people saying, "Oh, I built this and that and this app and this website on ChatGPT and using this plugin," but ultimately, at the end of it is, well, where does it live?
Where do you put it online? Yeah, and that's super interesting, because that's where we come straight into that kind of workflow. What also is super interesting, I think, for me in AI is that for the first time ever, we're getting the ability for people to build very personalized products and apps. And so for years, like, typical thing is someone to build a SaaS, maybe for your accounting needs, for example, and hundreds of people and thousands of people would use that SaaS, but you need it in a certain specific way, and maybe you had to do some stuff off the platform, then bring it online, that kind of stuff. But now, let's just take like a habit tracker, right? You can build your own habit tracker based on what you eat, what you do, how much fitness, fitness routine, etc. And it's just yours. It's very, very dedicated to yours. And that's for the first time ever in software. That's now a thing. And you're going to see more and more of that. And I don't think people are talking and looking at that more enough, because everyone likes personalization. And having a personalized app is way more powerful than not having one. Or using a generic app, right? And I think you're going to see that more and more happening. And people need to put these things online, right? And that's hopefully where, they use us and they see other people. But I think the personalization is going to be a huge trend you'll see more and more. And gone are the generic apps that try to, work for everybody, right? And ignore like edge cases and stuff like that.
You mentioned that you're about to start advertising and you've smashed the SEO game out of the park. Could you give us a bit of an insight into why you're now tackling the game of advertising, and what are your first steps going to be?
Yeah, we stayed away from paid ads mainly because, from what I know, there's a certain upfront investment you need. I think it's around $10,000 effectively before you even before you figure out like what's working. And for me, like, that was an investment I wanted to make, and it needed time and someone to run it. And we have a team around that. But I think the key with advertising is it's a catalyst for sales, effectively, right? If you do it well. And I think a lot of companies early on maybe invest in it too early, especially maybe VC companies who have capital. You have capital, but you don't have time, so you invest the capital. But if you don't know how to efficiently invest the capital, if you don't know who your customer is, where they sit, where is the best place to put their money, you're just blowing money out, right? And it's also like, it's a drug, right? It's effectively like, you will get more customers if you suppose you basically have your effectively have your strategy done, and that if you invest here, you'll get customers. But you will continue to get customers as long as you continue to invest in it. And as soon as you turn that tap off, you'll stop. And so I didn't want us to ever be over-reliant just on that, right? There are entire businesses who are built on that, and they invest in huge budgets of advertising and they get a return back. But I wanted this to be just an additional channel. And so right now also, like, every company in its trajectory will plateau at some point, right? Until you unlock the next stage of it. And it could be the product, could be a marketing kind of thing you need to get to. And we're not plateauing, but I wanted to make sure that we're thinking one or two steps ahead, right? And I want us to grow faster as well. And so advertising now, I'm thinking of it as a catalyst to really speeding up things that we're doing already. And so like we're starting with just Google ads because we do already really well with SEO, and Google ads are just higher ranking SEO terms. And so we know which terms we do well for, which terms we want to rank for, and we're probably not ranking well for yet. And so we're just putting money behind those and seeing, if we can do, better with that. And that's it. So it's really early days, but some interesting signs. And I think it can really accelerate the growth of the business. And that's why we're doing it now.
Moving on to the personal side of entrepreneurship, you have such a calm demeanor. You seem so relaxed. I want to just dive into a little bit about, the founder life, founder well-being, if you've ever edged towards the skirts of burnout or how you've staved that off, just a little bit about how you navigate those fields.
Yeah, I mean, appearances can be deceiving. Genuinely, like, it's a roller coaster. You're going from this is the best day ever, I'm so glad I'm doing this, to like, why the hell am I wasting my life on a web hosting company kind of thing. But you're obviously just going back and forth with it. But there's key principles that I try to abide by. Probably the hardest time is when you're balancing like maybe another job and running a company, because like it's you're just working around the clock. You don't have the luxury to like just step back a little bit, because one of those things is going to suffer. But like with that stage of life, it was about being honest about how much you can really put in and being efficient with that time, but not neglecting other things like health or just social stuff. So I never said no if somebody wanted to meet up for a drink or like someone's birthday or something like that. I was like, no, I'm too busy. I need to work. I need to deliver this stuff. If I wanted to really see that person or hang out, like I'd do it. And yeah, I think that helped me just set things apart and differentiate and just keep me going. And then in more now, I think I have the luxury of working when I want and having a bit of flexibility, right? And that's the thing. So I tend to travel a bit more, which is really nice. I mean, the UK weather, London weather is really bad. It's horrible. So I split my time between Lisbon and London sometimes, go for the sun, and that helps me just like re-energize from different perspectives. If I want to not work a morning, pick stuff up later in the evening, or spend a Sunday working stuff, I do that. I do also try to keep my weekends. So I don't enjoy like going into office on a weekend, or I'll do a few hours here and there, but I don't try to do like a 9 to 5 on a weekend unless I really have to or something urgent comes up. And so I do keep that. The interesting thing is I thought, when I was running this on the side, that when I quit, did it full time, I have so much time back. Basically, like I'll be able to play guitar and do hobbies, and you do stuff all in the spare time I was running the company. But your company just ends up consuming that spare time. But it's also because I love it. Like I enjoy working on it. I continue working. I have to pull myself away from that to make it to get time, and so I need to just carve out blocks of time and that kind of stuff. But you're constantly juggling with things, and it never really gets easier. There's lots of different shifting priorities. You have to continuously try to figure out like how do you cut through to the most important things? Where do you put your time in? And then you've got a team, so you've got like effectively 10 people reaching out to you. And so it's about how do you delegate more? How do you make sure that, the owners, you get people that will take the monkey off your back, which is that kind of saying where they don't give you more problems, they just deal with the problems. And so hiring is super important for that. Like you want people.
What is the message that you send down the chain to your employees? Are you the kind of founder who's impressed when you get a text message at 11 p.m. saying, "Oh, I'm working all night," or does that annoy you and you think, "Hey, you should be switching off"?
It doesn't annoy me. I mean, it doesn't make me feel great either. Like every now and then, like we're a startup, right? Where we don't have the luxury of being a very stable 9 to 5. But every now and then, I think it's interesting. But again, there's different ways of running a company. We're not a high growth VC company. We don't need to be working weekends, crazy hours to just keep going. And for me, like a company is a marathon, right? And that's what I want it to be. And so I'm very cautious of like, helping people not burn out basically, and making sure that they can deliver what they can in the time we have. Because I think effectively, if you are working 8 hours a day and you're efficiently doing that, you can do enough in that day. And I've been in environments where I've seen companies who are working like 12 hours a day or more than that, just in the office all the time, but they're not effectively working all of those hours and minutes of the day. They're hanging out, and there's some value to that, like just blending, like socializing with the team. But effectively, if you're working those 8 hours a day efficiently, you can get a lot done. And I think that's enough. And I practice what I preach, in the sense that you need that time just to step back, go out, re-energize, new ideas, and you come back, ready to go again. And I want that, that the best energy possible, as opposed to just long energy. Something that takes 4 hours can be done in 1 hour. Why? Because maybe you're slow and you're tired, but just take a break, come back and do it in an hour, that kind of thing. And so that's basically the company, that I've always wanted to build. And it's very tied towards my personality and the character. And I think that's where it is. And you get other founders who are just like high growth and, really want to, dive in. And it's interesting. I just came back from San Francisco, and the whole city's like that. Like people put negative connotations to that, but there are people in this world that want to just work. And there's the Teslas of the world, the SpaceXs, Silicon Valley companies, and people enjoy that. And what attracts them to the company is that high work rate, right? And that's cool that it exists. But we want to build a more balanced company. But again, we're not so laid back in that kind of 9 to 5 as we're talking about, a corporate environment where you can just disappear or do barely any work. I want people to be efficient with their time, especially with AI, as an added kind of side kind of coda, for example. There's a lot more you can do with the time that you have, and that's the message that we keep.
You have managed to grow a business that's profitable, sustainable, seems quite steadfast in its position.
Yeah.
Now, looking ahead, what's your long-term strategy for the business? And if you were to scale it, it's a double-part question.
Yeah.
Do you think you could keep the simplicity that you have in the product as it scales?
Yeah, it's a hard thing to figure out. I think the simplicity we could do it. The bigger thing I'm battling with is, can we keep the team size as small as possible, considering how many customers we have, right? So we want to double. So we want to go for 3,000 to 6,000 customers, right? And that's going to be a whole different kettle of fish. But I think there is a lot of opportunity in just keeping the product the same and growing, because so many people have still not heard of us, and I still am in a bubble. And I think that keeps me just, I guess, focused and humble, in the sense that I realize that we've got this product. There's, what do we have, like 70,000 people join us every month, sign up to the platform. But a lot of people just haven't heard of us, which is crazy. And so, for me anyway, and so it's just about, it means the problem is not the product itself, it's actually the marketing, right? And growing the awareness and the brand power and that kind of stuff out there. And so I think there's a lot more we can take the product to, by just keeping it very similar. But then there's stuff we've done already, right? Like we've grown horizontally. So we were just doing zip files, HTML, and PDF for like 3 or 4 years. That was like super key. And now we've added like 80 different file formats. But the reality is, like, 80% of your usage is going to come from 20% of use cases and file formats. So, but we can grow horizontally in that way. But we have to be simple, and because that is the core of our product, right? So, like a great inspiration for me is WeTransfer, who just got sold for nearly, I think, $1 billion. But it still, to this day, does something very, very basic. You just literally drag and drop a file, and that was what we modeled the first version of our app around. But thousands and thousands of people kind of used that and paid for that to make it work. And so obviously you can run a simple product for like multiples of, millions of revenue. It just depends where you want to take it. And I think The other thing, I think from a personal side point in terms of running a big company or a future company, for me, it's always been, I want to run this company until I don't enjoy it anymore. And your role is going to change. Like, you went from a one-person band, just, building things and coding things, to around managing a team. I'm doing like in between role, of course. But I know people who run bigger companies, and they run 200-300 people companies, and they don't get to touch the product. They're just people managers. And it's frustrating because you can't, just go and fix things yourself. You have to firstly try to convince someone to do it, and then make sure, they implement it right, and then edit it. And so that's such a long process. But you have a bigger ship to navigate, and so I don't think that's something I would enjoy. And so it's about taking the company as far as we can get, as far as I enjoy taking it, and then seeing where it is from there. Like, maybe I take a step back from it, or maybe sell it or something like that, but just growing it until I enjoy it. And that also ties back into, bootstrapping versus VC, because I don't need to now make sure that it's a £100 million company. It could be 10, 20, 30 million pound company. But I can choose where I want to take it, when I want to, and make that decision along the way. You don't have to do it from day one.